You know that daydream you always have every spring?
Oh, I know exactly where this is going.
Right. Like you buy a bag of potting soil, you plant a tiny tomato seed, and you just envision yourself as this like rugged, self-sufficient farmer.
Harvesting perfect, sun-warmed vegetables in your backyard.
Exactly. Destined for greatness. But today, we're taking a deep dive into a set of notes from a garden-based learning program run by two guys, Kesser and Steen.
And these notes are fantastic because they document the exact moment that daydream turns into a total nightmare for most beginners.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. We're bringing you along on this deep dive into their nature and innovation class to figure out why exactly your perfect tomatoes keep rotting from the bottom up.
Which is such a common frustration.
It really is. And more importantly, we're going to explore how fixing these classic childhood diseases of the greenhouse means we basically have to unlearn everything modern chemical-heavy agriculture has taught us.
We have to trace the plant back to its ancestral home.
Right, because to me, it's a brilliant set of notes to unpack. It highlights this huge flaw in how we approach cultivation.
Oh, totally. Because when something goes wrong in the garden,
Mm.
our instinct is to treat the environment like it's a broken machine.
Like we just need a quick fix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An industrial quick fix, we look for some, magical blue powder to sprinkle on the dirt.
Right, like we're fixing a car engine or something.
Yeah, and we completely forget that these plants evolved in highly specific, incredibly complex ecosystems thousands of years before we started sticking them in plastic buckets.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. So to solve the biological problems that Kesser and Steen's students are facing, you actually need a working understanding of geology, history, and honestly, a surprising amount of chemistry.
Well, the notes paint this incredible picture of the disconnect between the experienced growers like Kesser and Steen and their eager novice students.
I like the contrast.
We actually start the narrative right in the middle of Steen's new organic kitchen garden. They've just finished planting their crops.
A very satisfying moment for any gardener.
Oh, for sure. The notes specifically mention they're putting in tomatoes, squash, pumpkins, and this one chili variety that is supposedly stronger than the Cannon King from Oregon.
The Cannon King from Oregon, that sounds genuinely terrifying.
Right. I wouldn't mess with it. But Steen is standing there admiring this spectacularly healthy Hokkaido pumpkin plant.
And that pumpkin was grown from a seed Kesser actually saved from the previous year, right?
Yep. It's this perfect little closed loop system they have going on.
Which really just demonstrates that they understand how to read their environment. They aren't fighting nature.
They're working within its parameters.
Exactly. But meanwhile,
The students in their nature and innovation class are completely panicking.
total meltdown.
Messages are just flooding in from these beginners who are watching their prized tomatoes, their chilies, eggplants, just develop these terrifying, sunken, leathery black craters.
Right at the bottom of the fruit.
Yeah. And the beginners are all assuming their greenhouses have been invaded by some, I don't know, aggressive fungus or a flesh-eating bacteria.
Which, is a completely understandable fear when you're new to this and your food is turning black.
Oh, absolutely. I'd panic too. But Kesser and Steen immediately diagnose it as a classic childhood disease of the greenhouse.
Yeah. In Danish, where our guides are based, the term for this affliction is griffelrod.
Griffelrod, got it. And in English?
In English, it is widely known as blossom end rot. And this is the crucial part. It is not a pest.
Okay.
It's not an infection. It is a physiological symptom of the plant's internal infrastructure basically collapsing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Kesser and Steen are basically acting like IT guys, dealing with people who didn't read the manual.
That is a great way to put it.
It's like people skipping the video game tutorial and then wondering why they're losing right out of the gate. So if it's not a bug eating it from the outside, it has to be a structural failure on the inside, right?
Honestly.
Like, I'm picturing building a skyscraper, getting to the top floors, and just realizing you completely ran out of steel rebar.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, actually, because on a cellular level, plants use calcium to manufacture pectin.
Pectin? Like what you use to make jam.
Exactly the same stuff. In plants, pectin is essentially the biological glue that binds the cell walls together.
Okay.
So without enough calcium, the cell walls literally lose their structural integrity. And blossom end rot happens during the rapid growth phase of the fruit.
When it's swelling up.
Right. The plant simply cannot transport enough calcium all the way out to the very tip, the blossom end of that growing tomato or pepper.
So without that pectin glue, what happens?
The rapidly expanding tissue out there literally collapses and dies. It starts as this slightly water-soaked, almost translucent spot, and as the dead tissue dries out, it turns into that terrifying leathery black crater everyone panics over.
Wow. And the notes document a very specific laundry list of mistakes these beginners made to cause this, right? Like a localized calcium deficiency.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to fundamentally misunderstanding what natural actually means.
Right, because for instance, the beginners were watering their plants exclusively with rainwater.
Which sounds great, doesn't it?
I mean, yeah. To a novice, rainwater sounds like the most organic, holistic choice possible.
It sounds ideal until you actually consider the chemistry. Rainwater is effectively distilled water.
Meaning it's empty.
Exactly. It's remarkably pure, which means it contains almost zero dissolved minerals. So when you rely solely on rainwater in a potted environment, you are perpetually flushing the soil.
Ah, so you're just washing away whatever ambient nutrients might have been in the dirt.
Yep, without replenishing the structural building blocks the plant desperately needs to manufacture that cellular glue.
And combine that with the fact that these beginners were planting in just basic empty dirt. They completely ignored Kesser and Steen's advice.
They skipped all the important steps.
Yeah, they didn't mix in eggshells or mussel shells. They skipped making the homemade seaweed compost.
Which is a huge mistake.
And they didn't dissolve nutrient-dense weeds into their watering cans. They essentially placed this highly demanding, super fast-growing organism into an empty room and gave it empty water.
And that leads directly to the second trigger for blossom end rot, which is fluctuating soil moisture.
Okay, how does moisture trigger a calcium problem?
Well, this requires us to look at the physics of how a plant drinks. Because plants, they don't have hearts to pump fluids.
Right.
They rely on what's called the transpiration stream. As water evaporates out of the microscopic pores on the plant's leaves, it creates a negative pressure.
Like sucking on a straw.
Exactly. That negative pressure physically pulls new water up from the root system. And calcium is a highly immobile nutrient. It only moves through the plant by hitching a ride on this one-way water elevator.
So if a beginner forgets to water and lets the greenhouse soil dry out completely, that water elevator just stops.
It stops dead.
And the calcium transport halts immediately.
Precisely. And the real damage actually occurs when that beginner realizes the soil is dry, they panic, and they suddenly flood the pot with a massive amount of water.
Oh, I've totally done that. The guilt watering.
We all have. But the stress plant goes into survival mode. It rushes all that newly available water and whatever tiny bit of trace calcium is in it straight to the transpiring leaves.
Just to keep the core machinery alive?
Right. The rapidly growing fruit is completely bypassed. It starves for calcium, the cells collapse, and boom, you get the black rot.
Which means the immediate triage for you, the listener, if you're dealing with this, it's going to hurt.
It is not fun.
Kesser and Steen advise removing the affected fruit immediately.
Yeah, you have to. You cannot heal blossom end rot.
So if you leave that damaged tomato on the vine, the plant is just wasting immense amounts of energy trying to salvage a doomed biological project.
Exactly. You have to cut your losses to redirect that energy into new, healthy growth.
And going forward, stable watering is paramount. Keeping the soil uniformly moist ensures that calcium elevator never stops running.
But the notes also highlight a fascinating dynamic regarding fertilizer.
Oh, right. Because when beginners panic about poor growth, they usually grab, like, a high nitrogen fertilizer, right, to force some quick, satisfying green foliage.
Who doesn't love seeing their plant suddenly double in size? But forcing that rapid vegetative explosion means the roots physically cannot mine calcium fast enough to support both the new leaves and the fruit.
You're basically forcing the plant to outgrow its own skeletal system.
Which brings us to a major conceptual roadblock. When a modern grower hears calcium deficiency, their industrial-trained brain immediately thinks in terms of isolated variables.
Like, my plant lacks calcium, therefore I will go to the store, purchase a concentrated chemical bucket of calcium, and just dump it into the soil.
Right.
But wait, if tomatoes naturally demand such high amounts of calcium just to maintain their basic cell structure, why doesn't standard store-bought potting soil just come loaded with it?
That is the big question.
And the answer actually requires us to look at a map. We have to stop treating the plant like a synthetic widget and recognize that the tomato is completely out of its element in a North American or Northern European backyard.
Geography dictates biology. The wild ancestors of our modern tomatoes actually originate from the incredibly rugged, high-altitude terrain of Peru and Ecuador in South America.
Way up in the Andes.
Yes. They were not introduced to Europe until the 1500s. And interestingly enough, they were initially viewed with deep suspicion.
Because they're part of the nightshade family, right?
Exactly. Many Europeans thought they were poisonous. They grew them purely as exotic, ornamental status symbols.
So you take an ornamental berry because botanically, the tomato is actually a berry. Fun fact.
It is indeed.
And you try to grow it in Northern Europe, but the geology is fundamentally mismatched.
Entirely mismatched.
Because during the last ice age, which ended roughly 12,000 years ago, massive glacial sheets moved across Europe and North America.
And they essentially acted like continent-sized bulldozers.
Right, scraping away the deep, mineral-rich topsoil and just leaving behind this relatively young, depleted earth.
Now, contrast that glacial scraping with the tomato's native habitat, the volcanic slopes of the Andes Mountains.
Okay, totally different vibe.
Very different. That environment is characterized by deep, rocky soil that is constantly being replenished by mineral-dense volcanic activity.
And this historical context is how Kesser and Steen dismantle one of the most pervasive myths in modern gardening.
It's a huge truth bomb.
It really is. Because if you consult almost any standard agricultural blog, they will confidently declare that tomatoes prefer slightly acidic soil, usually recommending a pH between 6.0 and 6.8.
But standard gardening advice treats anything over 7.0 as an absolute death zone for vegetable cultivation.
Right. So how is the wild tomato surviving, let alone thriving, in an alkaline extreme like the Andes? I mean, we're talking a pH of what, up to 8.5?
Because that 6.0 to 6.8 pH recommendation is a completely artificial constraint.
Wait, really? Just totally made up.
Well, it was engineered specifically to maximize yield in intensive modern farming setups, where synthetic fertilizers are constantly pumped into the water supply.
Oh, I see.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the plant's evolutionary biology. The volcanic rock of the Andes is absolutely packed with native calcium, magnesium, and potassium.
So the wild tomato evolved over millennia to thrive in a highly alkaline environment.
Exactly. It frequently sits between a 7.0 and 8.5 pH. It is biologically adapted to literally swim in calcium.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the listener? If the tomato's ancestral home is full of alkaline calcium, and my greenhouse tomatoes are suffering from blossom end rot because they lack calcium...
I see where you're going with this.
Right. Why can't I just go buy a giant bag of agricultural chalk, which is just pure calcium carbonate, and dump it all over my greenhouse soil? Doesn't that just recreate the Andes Mountains right in my backyard?
The logic seems sound, I'll give you that, but it leads directly into what agronomists call the chemistry trap.
The chemistry trap! Sounds ominous.
It is. You cannot simply bully a complex soil web with isolated chemicals. When you uncritically dump processed calcium carbonate onto your garden, the soil pH spikes violently.
Look how high.
It can shoot well above 7.5 almost overnight.
And I'm guessing that sudden spike triggers a cascade of secondary failures.
It triggers chemical locking. Soil pH actually acts as the master switch for nutrient availability.
Okay, so when the pH spikes that fast and that high, the chemical bonds in the soil literally change.
Yes. The plant is suddenly and completely blocked from absorbing micronutrients like iron, manganese, phosphorus, and boron.
Even if they're right there in the soil?
Even if they are physically present in the dirt, they are chemically locked in a form the roots just cannot absorb.
Wow. So you solve the calcium deficit, but you immediately induce an iron deficiency.
Exactly.
And without iron, the plant can't produce chlorophyll, which is why the leaves suddenly turn yellow and sickly.
The plant is literally starving to death while sitting in the middle of a nutrient buffet it just can't eat.
That is tragic. And that yellowing is called chlorosis, right? Which perfectly demonstrates a foundational rule of agricultural science that Kesser and Steen touch on, known as Liebig's barrel.
Yes, Liebig's barrel. It is a phenomenal visualization.
So imagine a wooden barrel made of different sized planks, or staves. The barrel can only hold water up to the height of the shortest plank.
Right.
In your garden, calcium might be a towering 10-foot plank because you just dumped a giant bag of chalk everywhere.
But because that chalk spiked the pH and chemically locked away the iron.
Iron suddenly becomes your shortest plank.
Exactly. The tomato plant's growth halts right there at the iron limit. It completely ignores all that excess calcium you just added because the whole biological system is bottlenecked by the missing iron.
So you can't fix the plant by endlessly adding more of the abundant nutrient. You have to raise the shortest stave of the barrel.
Precise.
Which begs the question, If the Andes are naturally alkaline and totally saturated with calcium, why aren't the wild tomatoes suffering from chlorosis? Why aren't their nutrients locked away?
The answer comes down to the form the minerals take and the element of time.
Time. Okay.
Kesser and Steen's notes dive into the mechanics of wood ash, which functions almost identically to the ancient volcanic ash of the South American slopes.
Oh, that makes sense, because when organic plant material or volcanic earth burns, the combustion process leaves behind pure metal ions. You get highly concentrated calcium, potassium, and magnesium bound to carbonate.
Right. So think of your soil's natural acidity like a heavy padlock, keeping the various nutrients trapped and moderated.
Okay.
When you apply wood ash, the rainwater slowly breaks those carbonates down over time. It gently turns the key in that lock, releasing the calcium at a pace the soil biology can actually handle.
Instead of just blowing the whole door off its hinges like a massive dump of processed garden lime wood.
Exactly.
Oh.
As the rain dissolves the ash, the freed calcium and potassium ions react with the soil's natural acid, the hydrogen ion.
Okay, chemistry time.
Just a little bit.
Mm.
The metal ions neutralize the acid and leave behind an excess of hydroxide ions, which is the alkaline component.
So this slow, steady chemical dance gradually raises the pH while simultaneously saturating the soil environment with easy-to-absorb nutrients.
It mirrors the millennial-long volcanic processes of the Andes. It offers a balanced release rather than a jarring chemical shock.
Okay, so this leaves you, the listener at home, with a serious logistical dilemma. You are staring at a tomato developing blossom end rot.
A very sad tomato.
Very sad. We know the fruit desperately needs calcium to manufacture pectin and save the rest of the harvest. We know calcium is highly immobile. It won't easily migrate from the old leaves to the new fruit.
Right.
But we also just learned that dumping bulk calcium into the soil will spike the pH, trigger Liebig's barrel, lock out the iron, and starve the plant.
It's a catch-22.
Totally.
Yeah.
How do we get the calcium into the specific fruit without turning the soil chemistry into a complete war zone?
This is where Kesser and Steen's nature and innovation background provides a brilliant workaround.
I love this part.
If the soil chemistry is the bottleneck, you simply bypass the soil entirely.
Yes. Kesser introduces the concept of a foliar spray. He bypasses the root system completely by applying liquid calcium directly onto the leaves and the developing fruit.
Foliar feeding is incredibly clever. It takes advantage of the stomata, the microscopic pores on the surface of the plant's leaves.
The same pores doing the transpiration.
Exactly. While their primary function is gas exchange for photosynthesis, they can also rapidly absorb atomized liquid nutrients.
Just drinking it right in.
Yeah, sending those nutrients directly into the plant's vascular tissue, exactly where they are needed most.
And true to the organic, self-sufficient ethos of their class, you don't need to buy a synthetic chemical spray. The notes detail how you can use crushed eggshells or leftover oyster shells.
Which is such a great use of waste.
Right. You just dissolve those shells in a mild acid like household vinegar or citric acid.
By dissolving the calcium carbonate shells in a mild acid, you are essentially pre-digesting the nutrient.
Breaking it down.
Right? You break it down into a highly bioavailable liquid form. When you mist this directly onto the struggling plant, it is absorbed immediately.
So you solved the localized calcium deficiency in the fruit, fortifying those cell walls without ever touching the soil pH.
You completely avoid the chemistry trap.
It is a masterclass in seeing the garden not as a collection of isolated problems, but as this interconnected biological web.
It really is.
Now, for the listener who is currently sprinting to their kitchen to grab vinegar and eggshells, I have to pause you.
Put the vinegar down.
Exactly. Our mission today is to understand the deep mechanics, the why, and the how. If you want the exact step-by-step recipe for the oyster and eggshell spray, you need to check out the playlist linked by the creators.
Yes, highly recommend it.
Make sure you subscribe and follow Kesser and Steen's garden-based learning program. They're the ones putting out the specific tutorials that will teach you how to masterfully move these puzzle pieces around in your own backyard.
Moving the puzzle pieces around is the perfect philosophy. Because when you understand the whole board, you realize you aren't just fighting random diseases, you are managing an ecosystem.
Let's pull all these threads together. We started with the frustration of beginners causing their own crops to rot because they treated biological organisms like, demanding houseplants.
Giving them distilled rainwater and empty dirt.
Right. We traveled back to the deep, volcanic, alkaline slopes of the Andes to fundamentally bust the myth that tomatoes naturally prefer acidic soil.
A myth that causes so much unnecessary stress.
Totally. We walked the tightrope of soil chemistry, exploring how spiking the pH creates an iron lockup that triggers Liebig's barrel. And finally, we solved the crisis with the clever, root-bypassing innovation of a pre-digested eggshell foliar spray.
It is an incredible journey, tracing a single sunken black spot on a tomato all the way back to the geological history of the Earth.
It really puts things in perspective.
It does. And analyzing this through the lens of Kesser and Steen's notes leaves us with an incredibly profound, almost philosophical question to consider.
Oh, I'm ready. Lay it on us.
Well, we spent this deep dive unpacking how the modern recommendation for a tomato's soil pH, that rigid 6.0 to 6.8 range, was completely artificially engineered.
Designed purely for maximum industrial yield.
Right, blatantly ignoring the plant's evolutionary history, its original environment, and its actual biological preferences.
It really shifts your perspective on what we consider normal.
Exactly. It forces you to look around at the other systems we've built. How many other rigid best practices in our modern lives, whether in our workspaces, our diets, our daily routines, or, our expectations of productivity, are actually just stressful, artificial workarounds?
Workarounds designed for environments we were never biologically meant to thrive in.
Something to chew on next time you're out watering the garden.
Absolutely. Until next time, happy gardening, and don't forget to move those puzzle pieces around.